Welcome or welcome back, literarians, to the Literary Lori YouTube channel. I'm Literary Lori, aka Lori L. Tharps, and if you love to read books or write books that center the lives of Black people and other people of color globally, then you are in the right place because I love those things too. However, this video is not about my love of Black books. This is another video about my love of what? Black authors. Yes, I'm wearing my pin again. Anyway, this is day 27 of my special series for Black Literary History Month, where I am sharing the story of incredible Black writers who were born in February. Yes, that is the point of Black Literary History Month. So let's get to today's subject. Today we are talking about Michael Anthony. Yes, Michael Anthony is a Trinidadian. I was going to say a Trinidad Tobagoan. No, he's a Trinidadian author, writer, journalist, historian. And as fun fact, he and I share a birthday. So he was born on February 10th. So we are backtracking, but it doesn't matter because this is still February and he was born in February and we're going to go with that. So I also wanted to highlight Michael Anthony because, as I mentioned from the top, I wanted to make sure that people understood that when I say that there are so many amazing Black writers and authors born in February, I'm not just talking about Black American authors. So, Michael Anthony, born on February 10th, 1930, thought about, spoken of as a literary treasure in Trinidad and Tobago. He was considered one of the most prolific writers and most beloved writers in Trinidad and Tobago. Just a quick overview summary. He's the author of over 30 books, which include novels, short stories, books for younger readers, travel logs, and nonfiction history books, specifically history of Trinidad and Tobago. He's been contributed to several journals and anthologies, including Caribbean Prose, Island Voices, and Stories from the Caribbean. And Michael Anthony is known, like the type of writing he's known for, and I'm quoting, everyday life, his evocative descriptions, of everyday life, rural landscapes, and social dynamics in Trinidad and Tobago. We'll get more into the specifics, but I just wanted to let you know that we're literally talking about a, quote, literary legend, which again, amazing writers born in February, not just run-of-the-mill writers, but literary legends. So I have to say up front that I was not familiar with Michael Anthony before embarking on this project, so his work is new to me. He is new to me, but I wanted again to include a variety of writers from a variety of locations. And again, when you see literary legend, born in February, on your birthday, no less, you're like, yeah, let's talk about it. So I, of course, do these deep dives to do the research for these videos. And honestly, even though I have never read a book by Michael Anthony, his literary origin story is literally the stuff of myths, and somebody should make a biopic about his life story. So I'm going to just share the kind of highlights reel of his origin story just to show you how incredible this man was. And yes, he has passed on, hopefully to get you excited and interested to learning more about him. Okay, so let's begin the story. Michael Anthony was born again on February 10th in 1930 in a rural village in Trinidad called Mayoro. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. And that's on Trinidad's southeast coast. So he was born into a creative family, and where like being creative and reading and writing was definitely valued. And he says that he fell in love with literature from like infancy, from a really young age. He really loved poetry and stories, and he loved nursery rhymes and poems. And he, again, like so many of the other people I've talked about, he knew from that young age that he too wanted to be a writer. Unfortunately, Michael's father passed away when Michael himself was only 10 years old. And his father, the fact that his father passed away left the family in more dire economic situation, so that poor Michael was the idea of going on to higher education, going to college, being a writer seemed almost impossible. In fact, he entered into like trade school instead of, I guess you would say, regular high school, after high school. And he was, basically going to learn how to do like factory work. He was studying mechanical engineering, metal work, and even that he couldn't complete it because of the lack of financial resources in his family. So he ended up basically going on to find different jobs doing mostly manual labor. But he never gave up on his dream to be a writer. So imagine that backdrop, imagine that kind of frustration, but still nurturing the desire to write and self-educating, which is what he did. He was reading and writing on the side, and he was writing poetry. And so he says that his career as a writer officially started when he was 23, when some of his poems were published in the Trinidad Guardian newspaper. And that's all it took for him to be like, I can do this. I am doing this. And also realizing that he wasn't going to get the career opportunities that he wanted to be a writer in Trinidad. So he got on a boat and set sail for England. He went to England in 1954. Now, when he arrived, it wasn't like somebody was there like, oh, you made it, Michael. We're going to give you a job as a writer. It's all going to happen. No, he said that he struggled, as most immigrants coming to the UK did. It was difficult to find a job. This is post-World War UK. There were a lot of immigrants who were there to, supposed to help rebuild the country after World War II. There was a lot of racism, social isolation. He worked a lot of different odd jobs, but again, he was consistent with his working on his own writing. He fell in with some other creative people, and eventually he's able to find a job as a copywriter at Reuters news agency. It's called a sub-editor or copywriter, and this was by the early 1960s. So again, perseverance, never giving up, fully believing that even though nothing is turning out the way he wanted it to, he still keeps going. And the work at Reuters was actually, being in a job that is about words, being amongst journalists, this is all helping him build up his skill set. Okay. Now, somewhere in there, he also gets married. He gets married, and he has, in this time, I'll just say he has like 3 children. Eventually he has 4 children, but in this time period, he gets married. He starts his family, but again, he's still on this quest to be a writer. So he's working at Reuters now. And while he's working at Reuters, he's also starting to write short stories. And again, he's just keeps on working on his craft. So eventually, in this time, he knows that the BBC radio show Caribbean Voices, they often publish and read short stories by Caribbean writers on the show Caribbean Voices. So he's like, I'm going to send some of my stories there. And sure enough, this is what's really cool, is that when he starts sending his stories to the BBC, none other than the very famous Caribbean writer V.S. Naipaul said to him, he had just become the new editor of Caribbean Voices, and he got Michael Anthony's work, and he was like, yeah, this, you have real promise here. And he starts to accept his work, and so a bunch of his stories get performed or read on the Caribbean Voices BBC radio show. But this was really funny. Michael Anthony said that when he sent his work initially to V.S. Naipaul, he said, this is what he said to him. He said, "Mr. Anthony, your short story has possibilities, but promise me you will not write another poem." So I guess he took the advice because he kept writing his short stories and submitting them. And between 1955 and 1959, over 30 of Michael Anthony's short stories were accepted for broadcast on the Caribbean Voices show. So now he's going, right? Now he is getting his work published, these short stories, he's like a regular member of the contributors for Caribbean Voices on the BBC. He starts hanging out with other Caribbean writers in the UK. And because of that, he's now in a certified group of fellow writers. People start encouraging him to submit his work. So he starts submitting he has written a novel manuscript now, and he starts submitting to publishers. And his debut novel was called The Games Were Coming, and that was published by Andre Deutsch Publishers. And from then on, it's like he's off to the races. He's writing, submitting. He has three novels published, kind of like one after the other. His second book was called The Year in San Fernando, which is it's a semi-autobiographical book about his time living in the town of San Fernando in Trinidad. And again, that was one of his most well-known books. But after 14 years in the UK, apparently Michael Anthony's health is not doing well, just like he's not dying or anything like that, but he's not doing well living in those cold English winters. So he and his wife moved to Brazil for 2 years. And he was in Brazil, and he was mostly working for the Embassy of Trinidad and Tobago. He also worked as an English teacher, but really he was also collecting information, although that wasn't the intention right away. But he was so inspired, his next novel took place in Brazil. So after 2 years, and one more child being born, so he has a total of 4 children, he goes back to Trinidad in 1970. So by this point, he's back in his home country. He has written 3 or almost 4 novels by this point. He's had his work read on the BBC Caribbean Voices. He's been schmoozing with all of these other Caribbean writers who did stay in the UK. So basically, he's come home successful. He's done what he set out to do. He became a published and a well-established writer, but he didn't stop. Once he got home, he continued to write, and he ended up working primarily for the Trinidad and Tobago Ministry of Culture. He was an editor and a researcher for them. When he came back to Trinidad, there was a lot of social and political unrest. The country was now independent from British colonial rule. And so he was he continued to write fiction, but he also started to write nonfiction and started to write historical collections about Trinidad, making sure that he was intentional about collecting the stories of the people, pre and post colonial rule, to really have an authentic non-colonial perspective of Trinidadian history. Okay, so his historical books include Ana Parima, The History of San Fernando, which came out in 2001, Port of Spain, and Towns and Villages of Trinidad and Tobago, which came out in 1988. Port of Spain came out in 1978. So these historical books established him as a, quote, key chronicler of the nation's urban and rural development, drawing on meticulous research to preserve local heritage. So again, in addition to his fiction, Michael Anthony is also known as a historian and record keeper of the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. So again, he came back in 1970. He's working for the Ministry of Culture. He's working as a writer and editor for them, but he is also steadily pumping out more books. Remember, I said that he wrote over 30 books. So from what I gathered, Michael Anthony was a quiet man and a humble man. So he wasn't out here tooting his horn. He was just getting the work done. He apparently attended to avoid the limelight, but it couldn't stop. The limelight still came to him because his work was so beloved. So many people read his work. He actually was awarded the Hummingbird Medal in 1979, which is a national award for his contributions to literature. He won a Guggenheim Award. He had an honorary doctorate, a Doctor of Letters, given to him from the University of the West Indies. So again, he's like quietly putting his books out into the world, not being very showy about it, but you can't stop your work if it's that good and that well written and that prolific. There's so much of it. People are going to take note, right? And if it's good, people are going to take note. So one of the things that's very interesting that, again, I don't feel like I have the definitive answer to, but a lot of people categorize Michael Anthony's work as work for children, or not children, but young people. And a lot of people, just reading responses from his obits and stuff, people are like, oh my goodness, I wouldn't have made it through high school, or I read all of his books as part of our secondary curriculum. So a lot of people came in contact with his work through school because his books were already always on the curriculum for high schools and some colleges as well. So again, he was often classified as a writer for young people, but not everybody saw it that way. One publisher based in Jamaica, his name was Ian Randall, he said this, quote, Michael Anthony's unique contribution to Caribbean writing was to depict adolescent and rural life in a way that no other writer has done. He did so with a simplicity of style that was a reflection of his own personality and lifestyle. He might not have been the darling of literary critics, but he will go down as probably the most widely read Caribbean writer of our generation. Okay, so another critic said that Anthony's writing could be understood by the everyman, not as profound as Naipaul or as daring as Selvin, but he delivered classics. He was ours, unquote. So again, I haven't read his books, so I cannot speak on this, but I just think it's very interesting that a lot of the characters in his stories were young people. So obviously young people could connect, but people said that they would read his books for the first time in school, but then they would come back to them later in life and read them over and over again as adults. Okay. Interestingly, one of his third book, is it his third book? Yes, I think it was his third book, but regardless, it was called Green Days by the River, and it was published in 1967. Just to speak to the enduring quality of his work, that book was turned into a film in 2017. Yeah, like almost 50 years after it was published. It was turned into a very popular film. And actually, Michael Anthony makes a cameo in the film, which apparently everybody loved because he was like 80 some years old when he made that cameo in the film. So again, a lot of people are like, oh, I remember reading that book when I was a kid, 50 years ago. And now my kids are watching it on TV, watching the film version. So again, it just proves his enduring legacy. So So some people would say his work is for young people. Oh, I was going to tell you what he said about himself, about his books, whether or not he wrote for young people or not. I'm going to paraphrase it. But basically, when somebody said, is what you do you write for young people? Is that what your work is? And he said, I don't set out to write for young people. Like, I'm not saying I'm writing just for kids or for young people. That wasn't my intentions. I'm writing the stories that I think that I need to write and that they feature young people. But when I look back on them, I can see that these are books that obviously speak to young people because that's who I'm writing about. So again, he didn't set out to say, I am writing for young people. But he had no problem with saying that these books, speak to those who are going through the issues that he's talking about in many of his stories. All right, so just to speak again to his longevity, so apparently Michael Anthony was in a very bad car accident in 2009, but and had to slow down his writing output. Nonetheless, at age 90 in 2020, he published his 35th book. It was a novel called The Sound of Marching Feet, and it was based on the impact American soldiers had on Trinidad and Tobago during the Second World War. So Michael Anthony died on August 24th, 2023. He was 93 years old. So, I mean, I don't even know how to quantify that largesse of a literary output. Like I said, so that was book 35 when he was 90 years old. It kind of reminds me of Maryse Condé, who also, was writing up until the very end. And I believe she was in her 90s as well when her last book was written. And remember, she was actually going blind, or she had already gone blind at the time. So I will leave links to some of Michael Anthony's books, some of his favorites, some of the ones that other people consider favorites. If I can find the link to the film of the movie that was made of his book, I will add that too. So I think my big takeaway for learning about Michael Anthony's work is that, again, he was considered a national treasure. Like, people really felt that his work was it showcased what Trinidad and Tobago really was about. He understood who the people were and tried his best to kind of show that in his work. And it's like people like this, it's books like this where you can, if you read the work, I can be halfway around the world and read his work and get a better understanding of this island nation that maybe I'll never see in my lifetime. But by reading this man's work, not just one book, but several of his books, I can understand that. And I think that's what he was trying to do in some ways. I'm going to leave you with a quote of his, which speaks to his continuous love of writing. And that was, quote, "A book is from your heart and mind. It is your love put into words," unquote. And from listening to what other writers from Trinidad said about him, that he was always involved with helping up and coming writers. He loved the writing community. He was a friend of the Bocas Lit Festival. This is a man who loved writing. And I think all the way back to when he was a little kid loving nursery rhymes and poems, this is what he wanted to do with his life, and this is what he did with his life. It is such a testament to those of us who also felt called to be a writer from day one. And he didn't let anything stop him from achieving his dream. And he did it quietly and steadily up until the day he died. So I hope that's inspirational for some of you. Again, I hope some of you look up his work. And I will see you tomorrow for the last day of Black Literary History Month. Thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.